in the meantime, you have been recommending a lot of good scholarly books. And one of the books that I bought is about werewolves. And because I just got it, I couldn't go through it. But we came to the favorite topic of mine when it comes to tonight's just the whole episode. Uh, when we're talking about werewolves, can we first maybe try to make not just to explain and give description of who these what these beings are, but can we first maybe start by saying if these creatures are cryptids or they belong to some other category?
Yeah. So werewolves, like I sometimes see them included as cryptids. That's mostly a misunderstanding. People aren't familiar with the werewolf literature and assume that a werewolf is like if anyone here's watched Harry Potter, where he turns into a wolf, he has like the top parts of a wolf and he has the claws and he's walking around on legs as some sort of wolf man. That's what people tend to think of, and thus it sort of makes its way into cryptozoology. That's a mistake. Properly speaking, a werewolf is a man who turns, we'll see why I put scare quotes there, into an actual wolf. There's sometimes details that like let you tell him apart from normal wolves, but they tend to be things like he was really big, he had glowing eyes, he had glowing like just things that make it obvious it's a spiritual entity rather than you had one too many beers and saw a wolf and got scared. So not a cryptid. As I said, like often gets included by connoisseurs of the weird as a cryptid, but properly speaking, werewolfism is, I'm going to use metaphysical activity here as a sort of byword for actions humans can do at a transmundane level, because I don't want to use loaded terms like sorcery or magic, because there's also like miracle working, sort of all sorts of like doing miracles, exorcism. There's all kinds of metaphysical activities we can do that aren't sorcery. And just maybe werewolfism is sorcery, but before we say that, I would like to prove it rather than simply assume it, if that makes sense. So werewolfism is, that book is by Claude Lecouteux. It's one of two books he wrote on werewolves. The one you have is his translations of the major memorits. So again, supernatural encounters involving werewolves. Most of them, some of them folklore, but many of them trial records. So these aren't like, oh, I heard from a friend who heard from a friend. These are jurists recording often things like sometimes solicited by torture. There's a couple ones in that book that are absolutely someone who's just really mentally ill, but sometimes given freely by people who were completely sane. His second book, which is Werewolves and Fairies, goes into, well, what is a werewolf more in detail. It's one of several very good books published by scholars on the European werewolf lore prior to 1900. The other two really good overviews are Carlo Ginzburg's Ecstasies, Deciphering the Witch's Sabbath. Oh, yeah, that one's good too, but that one's more encounters. And then there's Daniel Ogden's The Werewolf in the Ancient World. Much of what I'm about to say is partially drawn from them, but it's also drawn from a lot of more recent literature on shamanism and some Chinese records, but the Chinese werewolf material hasn't been translated well, unfortunately. So yeah, werewolf it's a form of metaphysical activity where, in brief, your soul leaves your body in the form of a wolf. For parallels, I guess, like soul flight or soul ascension is very common in religious literature. It shows up several times in the books of the prophets. Ezekiel is like, I was taken out of my body. We see that also in the Revelation of John, right? He's like, was taken out of my body, flew, was standing around and whooped into heaven. As it shows up in all sorts of other religions, often initiated intentionally. In the case of werewolfism, it was intentional, but it was intentional in the manifested form of an animal. The aim being to assume some traits. Well, so I shouldn't say the aim in a categorical sense, because people tried to do these things for different reasons. So, for example, there's a reasonable enough body of evidence that Norse berserkers may have left their bodies in the form of wolves or bears to channel the savagery of wolves and bears. In a Greco-Roman context, the purpose was very different. The werewolf rites of the Etruscans and possibly the Arcadians, there's still an academic dispute there, but we'll just say the Arcadians because more data is better data, was not intended to be savage and go around wreaking havoc, but rather to control man's animal nature as a way of elevating man up to the gods. That's the Greco-Roman / Etruscan, which has some similarities to Roman, but very, very different. Other shamanic or animal transfers are also different. Inuit shamans doing that sort of thing are intending to channel more positive traits of the animal in question. Sometimes there's belief that the animal in question can serve a healing capacity. This one especially shows up with, I'm going to call it Christian shamanism, for lack of a better word, where I'm going to savage my enemies is not religiously approved of. I don't know why. Nothing about that in Jesus. He never said anything about not savaging your enemies in the form of a wolf. But yeah, basically, it's not a cryptid. There are the idea that it's a physical animal is usually contradicted both by the accounts themselves, where the people will often see the person's body at the same time as they see the werewolf, and they'll notice a sort of sympathy between the two. But it's also contradicted by interviews with people who claim to have done this, whether we want to believe them or not, where again they describe it as soul flight.